There he is.
Good morning. Have we got audio? Let's have a look.
Have you got audio?
Yep.
All right. How you doing, Leo? Looking good.
Thank you. Yeah, doing really well, thanks. Yep. Just
Right.
stick this on. That's it. So where are you?
We're freezing on the east coast of the United States.
Okay, well, we're freezing here on the southwest of the UK.
All right. How you been doing? Now, I know I really enjoy watching your YouTube channel.
Well, thank you.
Really great insight into your career and things. How did you get started on YouTube?
COVID, I guess. Lockdown. And I've got one of the guys that works for me. Excuse me. I've got a sore throat.
That's okay.
One of the guys that works for me, our tour manager's a media guy. He does a lot of media things for up and coming bands. And he's always encouraged me, you should do this and that and the other. And I said, well, okay, I'll have a go to YouTube thing. And he kind of encouraged me to do it. That's what I did. Plus the fact I've always had a lot of people writing to me and asking me about one thing and then another. And of course, I did start a book about 25, 30 years ago, which is still ongoing with breaks. I get bored with it, and don't take it up. So sometimes it's easier just to do a synopsis story in 5 minutes on YouTube.
Well, David,
and I've been encouraged, by the people that write to me and say they enjoy it or with other questions. So I try to do it once a week. It's lapsed a little bit with with the lockdown and everything. Sometimes psychological motivation is not enough. You think, God, what's going to happen to the world? And I tend to like to be pretty positive when I'm doing a YouTube thing.
Right. How does it feel that you can watch your whole career on YouTube from your earliest days with 10 years after to 170 split?
Yeah,
I mean,
just about. I mean, I obviously I don't watch myself on YouTube. I watch lots of other things, but it is interesting, isn't it? Not just in music or arts or history or politics or whatever. I've recently in the lockdown, I've taken up cycling, and which I did many years ago. But if I want to do something on my bicycle, I can watch a YouTube video. I could change the gearbox on my car with a YouTube video or anything. There's no excuse. Or, how did Jimi Hendrix play this? It's on YouTube. Takes some of the mystery away from things, really, but it's fascinating, and I think it's great. It's excellent. There are negative sides to it, of course, with all this politics and misinformation and things that goes on and hatred that's spread, but, via the social media. But the positive side of it is great. I think it's a very instructional tool. I mean, I think my career would have changed drastically. I may not have even been a musician had there been things like that available, because the whole world opens up to you, doesn't it? Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go.
Right, exactly.
About a different country or anything.
Right.
There are no excuses, Leo.
Sorry?
There are no excuses anymore.
No, there aren't. There aren't. That's right. And even, someone that's been playing music for a living for what? Let me have a think. Over 60 years, which sounds unbelievable, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
There's always something that I can learn. Sometimes I'll watch a YouTube and think, that's what I'm doing, because I learned by ear off of records.
Right.
I had guitar lessons, but it didn't go into, it could have done, I guess. It didn't go into huge, great depths on flat 13ths and 15ths and modes and, circle of fifths and all that. It loosely touched on it. So I learned all that by ear, but it's all there now.
Well, Leo, I wish when I was a kid, they had YouTube, because I don't know if you remember, there was a show you did at Hunter College.
Yeah.
A million years ago.
Yeah.
I was a young aspiring bass player, and I went home scratching my head. I wish there was a YouTube so I could, what the heck was he doing?
Yeah, you probably know that from me. Yeah.
And that segues into, you must have had a jazz background, correct?
Only by ear. I liked, I think Alvin and I kind of grew up together, as you probably know, and we were into Count Basie, you know, bands like that. Even Stephen Grappelli, Django Reinhardt, Duke Ellington, as well as the blues and early rock and roll. So it was a mixture of all that.
Yeah.
That I learned. And then I kind of went through a phase where I bought every jazz record that I could afford and listened to. And I listened to the bass players like, say, Scott LaFaro or Ray Brown. And I tried to emulate them. Again, not by learning the exact notes, but trying to get the feel of the thing, you know. And as they say in jazz, if you play a wrong note, play it twice, and it sounds like it's intentional, you know. And that's what I did. I always said we played pseudo jazz, you know, because a jazz musician knows what he's playing and why he's playing. He may not be playing it in the best of taste, you know. Some guys I've worked with that are jazz musicians are very technically brilliant, but their playing is awful because it's meant to communicate something and for the enjoyment of the listener. And they tend to be a little bit introverted, a lot of those guys. But yeah, I had a big interest in it.
But you were on the bandstand quite early, by 16, and you did some theater work. So basically, how did you gravitate towards the instrument?
Well, I think that there was a thing in the UK in the 50s that came out called skiffle music.
Right, the skiffle, right. Lonnie Donegan.
Yeah. For those the Americans that aren't, it was sort of, I always call it like bluegrass without the finesse or the musical prowess. It's a record. And it swept the country via Lonnie Donegan, as you say. Every kid could learn 3 chords and be in a band. And okay. I got hooked up on that, although I was playing banjo. My grandfather, who passed on, but there was a banjo in the family, and I started to mess around on that. Having heard an old 78 on a wind-up gramophone of Lead Belly and Jimmy Rogers, I kind of became interested in stringed instruments, and I couldn't afford a guitar, so I started on banjo, really, playing banjo. And then I saved up my money and bought a guitar. Went for guitar lessons, joined a band, a local band, you know, a band that plays for a brother's wedding or that kind of thing, rehearses twice a week and plays twice a year. And they needed someone to play the bass. And so I elected to do that on the bottom 4 strings of my guitar. And I graduated to bass. And when I started playing bass, I realized that was the how can I say, I had the feel for the rhythm section much. It excited me to pick up a song and drive it along. And so I never looked back, really. I do have a couple of guitars, but I've never played guitar in a band or anything like that, or no wish to at all. I just like the bass.
And you were, I guess, with Alvin, your first professional band was the Jaybirds. That's correct. And you guys had gone to Hamburg. Can you describe what the scene was like there and how that really, playing night after night, helped you develop as a player?
Well, it was, what was it, 1960, 61, 62, not long after World War II.
Right.
So not a lot of people spoke English. And fortunately, I'd learned German in school, and it wasn't that long from leaving school when you think about it. I was sort of 18, a couple of years to 3 years at the most. So I was okay learning German, but it was a total culture shock going from, you know, Nottinghamshire to what was one of the sex capitals in the world, and living in the middle of it all. That was the eye-opener to me. Well, I think George Harrison said, you go there a boy and come back a man, and it's a little bit like that. Musically, the intensity of playing an hour on and an hour off is something that I would recommend to any musician who wants to develop his skill. That's what you've got to do. Sure. Nowadays, it's probably not so easy. You know, there's young musicians, they get a lawyer, they get an accountant, they get signed to a record label. The record label puts them with a producer. Someone writes the songs for them. They play the songs, they tighten them up in the studio, and they go and do a few showcases. And if they're lucky, they maybe do 20-minute spot on a major tour, then they don't really hone the craft. It takes them a long time to do that. Although they've got the advantage of going to guitar school or whatever they want to do. But I think it's good to get out there in front of an audience, and not necessarily an audience that's sympathetic to what you're doing either. You know, you need to learn to take that indifference and rise above it. So
right. Do your apprenticeship. Yeah.
It was an apprenticeship. It was an informative period, and not just for Alvin and I, or what went on to become 10 years after, but lots of bands of the period, you know, like the Beatles and many bands passed through clubs in Germany or doing the pub circuit in the UK.
And then, of course, you become 10 years after, and you have your residency at the Marquee. I'm always curious, what is it about American blues that appealed so much to the British working class that you guys took what was essentially a Black American music and gave it back to us?
Well, I think it first became to the note of people in the UK in the 1950s, when a couple of German concert promoters called Lippmann Rao brought, I think, Sonny Terry Brown and McGee, Big Bill Broomsey, and maybe one or two others over to do a tour. I think that was 1956, and they played the Albert Hall. And you just remember the exciting thing was the guitar. I think that's really what started it, the guitar. And all these guys would raw guitar playing bands, and bands like the Stones and Clapton and lots of many others. That's the first time we kind of got hooked in, were introduced to that. I mean, some would have heard it before, but perhaps people like Alexis Corner, who's very well respected as a forerunner of British blues, probably did, but I didn't, except via Alvin's dad was a big prison song collector, American blues prison song collector. So I knew a lot of those people, Muddy Waters and different people, but that's what the appeal was. And it was a genre that started to catch on in the clubs from people like Alexis Corner and John Mayall to start with, really. At the time that maybe 1958, 59, Alvin and I were playing a mixture of rock and roll and blues, you know.
Yeah.
Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and Eddie Cochran and Ray Brown possibly, and one or two more obscure acts. But we were putting that swing stuff into our repertoire as well. So we kind of slipped into blues. We didn't call ourselves a blues band at first, and then we called ourselves a blues band. And then our manager said, if you call yourself a blues band, you're going to limit yourself. You've got to think of a name. So I came up with the name 10 years after, and I think we became a psychedelic blues band that played rock and roll. You know, it was never totally fixed. Like a band like Zeppelin, for instance, they had a particular sound. They went a certain route. Where 10 years after would veer from a swing thing, a blues thing, straight rock and roll, psychedelic, maybe a little bit of country. You know.
Right.
We never. It seems that, you know, as tragic as it sounds, you actually, whenever the British invasion came over, it made it safe for us to listen to the blues.
Well, I always said,
kind of twisted, huh?
Yeah, the Americans didn't appreciate the black music heritage, and it took a load of middle-class English white kids to come over to sell black music to American college kids. And,
exactly.
That's right. And promoters like Bill Graham that mixed and matched musical genres, of course, was a big champion of a lot of those black musicians, not just blues, but country and jazz.
Well, Tom and I always
we'd play shows with a gospel singer, a jazz musician, and an American blues player all at the same time, plus a psychedelic band and an English band, and you know, he would put such a variety on his shows. It was interesting. It was fantastic. I mean, it's always been a dream of mine and Alvin's to play in the States anyway, because you know we grew up on American movies, and it seems coming out of the end of World War II, where there was rationing and everything was grey in the UK, and you see all these college kids in California driving around in open top, you know.
What was your impression of America when you first came here?
My impression?
Yeah, when you,
I was in awe of it.
yeah,
I thought it was incredible. You know, when we landed in Los Angeles and we were picked up by the record company in a Cadillac limo and taken to the Sunset Marquee just off the strip, and there was a swimming pool there, and sitting around the swimming pool were television and movie actors that I'd seen before. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe what was available for the consumer, records and whatever you wanted, really. In fact, after the first tour, when I came back to London, and London was swinging London, so it was pretty good.
yeah.
I almost cried when I got off the plane and it was raining. Yeah, it's the grass is always greener, I think. You know, I've lived in America for 16 years, or did,
Yeah.
until recently, and of course I got used to the American lifestyle, and there are parts of it that I really think are great, and parts of it that I don't miss at all. So, but the first few tours of America, we thought we'd made it.
Well, it's interesting. You had you talk about you did the Newport Festival with Miles and Roland Kirk and people like Nina Simone. What experience? How did that affect you to play alongside the masters?
I don't think it. I think I was young and arrogant. I don't think I was better than them, and I'm sure I thought they were better than us, but it didn't bother me.
Yeah,
We did. You know, I've always felt that you do the best you can, and if it's accepted, it's fine. If it's not, it's not. You know, throughout my life, when I was starting out, of course, I've played shows to people that were totally indifferent, and you know, played a venue where you've got set up for 2 sets, and you do 1 set, and then the promoter says you can't do another set, or the audience will riot. Here's your money, go home. So it didn't, you know, it never bothered me, the indifference. I just thought it was great. I thought it was a feather in our cap to be invited to play the Newport festival.
Well, that was, I think, the first year that they had
Yes,
rock musicians there.
Yeah, I maybe they were just moving with the times, but I felt it an honor to play there. But I didn't see myself as up there with those great players. I just saw myself as doing what I do to the best of my ability, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do it there. And you know, sometimes if I listen back to some live recordings now, I think, my God, how many wrong notes are there in 3 minutes? but who's to say, you know?
Well, if you play them twice, you're okay.
That's what I said. Yeah, I played them more than twice. Now people say, could you do a video and play the part that you played way back in, you know, 1968 on this particular live thing? And I start to play, and I think, I wouldn't play it that way now. I'd play it slightly differently.
Well, let's hope
With
so.
the same energy, I hope, but slightly different notes. You know.
But you also at the Marquee Club where you guys were, you had quite your peer group included, I guess, Jethro Tull, Fleetwood Mac, John Mayall, Alexis Corner, Cream. Was there sort of a friendly competition between the bands?
Yeah, I don't even know whether we thought of it as a competition. We were all out there doing gigs, and we all hung out together. I think it came in later but maybe after Woodstock, when the people realised there was money in that genre of music, which was always called underground, and the accountants moved in, and the lawyers moved in, and the you know, the publicity people moved in, and one thing and another. And I remember, I think sometime in California after that, and we were playing a show, and John Mayall was supporting us, and John came up to me and he said, he was going on before us, and he said to me, my bass player hasn't turned up. Would you play bass? So I said, yeah, okay, John, no problem. So I played bass on the set, and afterwards my manager went berserk, and he said, you're the headline act. You should never go on and play with a support act ever again. And in many ways, from a commercial point of view, I guess he's right. But that's what happened, you know, in those days. People didn't think about that so much. You just got up and played and hung out, and there wasn't. There may have been a friendly rivalry.
Who were some of the artists of that era that impressed you, that you really enjoyed watching?
I like Janis Joplin because of her energy,
Okay.
the way she communicated with an audience. Having said that, there were many. I'm just trying to think of well, I mean, we've played with just about all of them, and they've all got something to offer, from, you know, Big Mama Thornton to Muddy Waters to Cream to Hendrix to, you know, even bands like the Eagles, you know, supported us on one American tour, and I enjoyed all of them. Often I didn't take advantage of that I could have done of seeing all the acts. I saw bits of most of the shows we played with, but we were on such a tight schedule, different town every night, one enormodrome after another. Sometimes you didn't go down before the show started and stay till the end of the show. You go down just before you needed to go on and play, and leave immediately after. Often they leave immediately afterwards because of the local police said we had to leave immediately afterwards, you know, because of the crowd and what have you. But yeah, I was fortunate to see a lot of great players. Elvis, I even saw Elvis.
Oh, really? Okay. I guess the sort of the Vegas version of Elvis, right?
The first Vegas thing, yeah.
Wow.
And I was a big Elvis fan from the Sun period. You know, I like rockabilly, and of course Bill Black was a big influence.
Sure, on everyone.
Yeah, and I like to play rockabilly. I'm not very good at slap bass. I think I would be if I tried, but I play contrabass, but you need to change the strings and the string height to do rockabilly properly, and I've just not got around to doing it. I've got a set of strings here to put them on, but I haven't done so. A pal of mine, Dave Rowe, played with Johnny Cash for maybe 15 years, and he kind of reintroduced me to rockabilly again after I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. And I revisited a love affair with contrabass, which I stopped playing with 10 years after, in maybe 1968.
Okay.
Because of the logistics of carrying one around, you know, was too much. But I always tried to play like an upright bass player, because that's what, when I started out, there were very few bass guitar players around.
David, that goes to our theory of the pre-Jocko world.
Yeah, Leo, we have this philosophy that Jocko was the demarcation point of bass players, meaning before Jocko, you have Jimmy Blanton, Willie Dixon.
Yeah.
All of the electric players were listening to upright players, basically because of what you said. There were very few electric players.
And there were, you know, Jameson, of course, was an upright player too. So
Exactly. And then post Jocko, it got to the point where chops without feel became de rigueur. I mean, what was it last night? We found out that Chick Corea had passed.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
When you think about it, that his original group to where it became a much more chops-oriented showcase versus a groove. And what do you think about that?
I agree with you. And I look at a lot of these. I watch quite a few, you know, the YouTube learn bass forums and things like that. And I think, well, it started out as a rhythm instrument, an instrument that picks up a band and moves it along and drives it along, to being something that plays over the top of it. Like I think sometimes a guitar solo will play straight over the top of the groove, and it can do because the groove's set down. But if a bass player starts doing that, unless it's hitting that groove all the time, you play 100 notes but still hit the groove, or you can play 2 or 3 notes and hit the groove. It doesn't matter. But the main thing is you got to pick the band up and drive it along, and that's really where I came from. Get the groove, pick the band up, drive it along, and then work out what notes you're going to play. And if you can put a little riff in there, that's great. If you can put a memorable lick in there, if you can show off a couple of chops, then fine. But never miss the groove, never miss the drive.
Amen to that. Well, when I first heard 10 Years After, my sister had just come back from England and she brought a copy of Undead.
Okay.
And oddly enough, Woody Herman's drummer lived 4 floors above me, Don Lemond.
Okay.
So when I heard Woodchopper's Ball, I immediately went upstairs to play it for Don, and this enormous smile came on
That's
his
an
face.
interesting story. Yeah, Woody came to see us at the Fillmore,
Okay.
but I didn't actually meet him. He'd met our manager one day. I guess he was pleased because he'd be getting a royalty from his songs. So what he thought about our version of it, I will never know.
Well, I actually saw him. They played Philharmonic Hall in New York,
Yeah.
and they went on first, and then they backed up. Who was it? It wasn't Shirley Bassey.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was amazing too. Don said to me, "Just think about it. I have to walk only 2 blocks, and I'll get to the gig."
I know. Perfect. No long 13-hour bus drives in the freezing cold weather. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Leo, one other question about that song. What made you guys go, "Hey, let's do Woodchopper's Ball"? I mean, technically, you would think, "Oh my God, that's an old song. Why would we do it?" But you did such a magnificent job. What was the impetus?
Well, it was a way to show off our chops, I guess, for Alvin and I to show off our chops. And we started doing it as a play. Sometime maybe 66 or 67, we did aside from trying to get our own band thing going, we worked as backing group for different acts. And we worked with this vocal act called the Ivy League, very much like the Beach Boys. And we were working in cabaret, and they'd come on and we'd back them for their act. And then they'd go off. And when they went off, we started doing that as a playoff.
Oh, okay.
Just as a little playoff for them. And it kind of stuck.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That's a great version, though. I love it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 10 years after, you guys stole the show at Woodstock, which was no small honor. Now, I from what I've heard you say on other interviews on your YouTube channel, that you 10 years after was just touring so much at that time that Woodstock was just another gig on the schedule. Did you have any idea at that point that moment that Woodstock would be etched in history?
No, absolutely no idea at all. I heard that when we got there that it was going to be filmed, but lots of things have been filmed and nothing's happened. I didn't even realize how big it was going to be until we flew in to LaGuardia, and then we drove up from LaGuardia, and that's where our American manager told us that how many people were there, and it had been declared a free festival and the freeway was blocked and so on and so forth. I realized it was going to be quite a big thing. But, at the same time, people are telling you what a big disaster it is too. And from a logistical point of view for the bands playing there, I guess it was, the stage was slipping in the mud. There was no cover from the rain. Health and safety would have just closed it down immediately. Too much acid and no food, and no dress. We didn't really have a dressing room. The hotel we should have had was full and we couldn't get in. So, there was all these things about it. And you're thinking, well, let's get on and get out of here. And then, of course, it rained, so we were stuck. I was stuck in the back of a U-Haul for 5 or 6 hours, I don't know how long. Did the show under great duress because of the humidity and the water running in between the cables on stage.
Yikes.
We had to stop maybe one song 3 times, keep tuning up, and then Alvin broke a string, and it was one of those things you remember that if anything could go wrong, it was going to go wrong. And it did, but the redeeming thing about it was the audience was great, and they were encouraging, and people that looked like something from Mad Max around fires covered in mud, as far as the eye could see, with steam rising. It was encouraging to play, but we did it. We went off, and we got out of there as soon as we finished, or as quickly as we could, and left, and then carried on with the tour. I didn't really, it was the Manson murders and the Man on the Moon. So there was a lot to see on the news without thinking about,
Right.
is this the biggest festival ever, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until we finished the tour we were on, went home. I think I actually went up into the Sierra Nevada mountains with a horse and a mule for 10 days to escape from civilization at that period. And then I went back to the UK. And when we came back the next time, that's when people started saying, this is before the movie came out, what about
Right.
Woodstock? How was Woodstock? Was this, was that? Woodstock toilet paper and everything you could buy there. And of course, then when the movie came out, that really escalated things on not just on a national level, but on a worldwide level.
Wow.
And it was all about Woodstock. And we went from playing, I mean, on an average, by pre-Woodstock, 10 years after, we'd do on our own 2,000, 3,000, maybe 5,000 people at the most. We went from that to sort of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, 60,000 people, So it escalated the band.
Yeah, yeah.
A piece of luck, really. These days, you'd have millions and millions of dollars spent on promotion to even get a quarter of the way there. But we were lucky, and that's, I say, it changed the business forever. People realized, then, wow.
Right, you were right at the cusp of when the entertainment industry realized there's millions of dollars in the rock and roll industry. But 10 years after, you guys kept up a strict recording and touring schedule. You never really slowed down.
No, we didn't. The record company said it was 2 records a year, I think. Mm-hmm. So we were touring America, maybe 3 tours a year of America. That's 21, 30 weeks maybe. Making a record, touring in the UK and Europe, and a little bit of time off.
Did you find you had to change your approach to playing when the venues became larger and
No, not really. The advent of the PAs came in.
Okay.
We were never a harmony vocal band, which I think would have been difficult. And so the only monitor system that we had at the time would be one speaker for the vocalist,
Right.
Floor wedge for the vocalist. And it was 10 years after material. It was probably only 1 minute of singing and 15 minutes of guitar playing, and we got our own balance on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe compared with nowadays, unless it's for show, nowadays the equipment's smaller. When we upped the number of marshals, for example, that we had, and you balanced up as you could on stage. And what came through the PA was probably, the sound wasn't totally fantastic in those days, not to what it is now. We always prefer, from a sound point of view, if it's an indoor venue, a small theatre is always nicer for sound. 3, 4, 5,000 people is much better than a baseball stadium or a basketball stadium or an ice arena where the acoustics are not that great. So I enjoyed the experience of it, but from the point of view of hearing what you were doing, it became a little bit disappointing, and Alvin hated that side of it.
Yeah.
Didn't like it that much. He preferred the smaller, so much so that he really wanted to de-escalate, to become smaller.
Right. Well, he did that record with Milan, and which was
he did.
More...
He did his best to do that. Yeah. Right. Whichever way you want to look at it, that's what he did. Yeah.
When you look back with your career with 10 years after, you made so many records. What are some of the records that are your favorites? What tracks and records stand out to you the most?
It's difficult to say. I mean, first of all, when I've made a record, you make it as best you can at the time. And you listen to it and you think, great, and then I don't want to hear it again for a number of years, because if I revisit it, I will always think, and it's true today, I'll always think that could have been better. We could have done it differently or whatever. So I've not done that. The only time I've been surprised with 10 years after is when I've heard something on the radio and I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good. What is that? And it's 10 years after, not necessarily a well-known song, but an album track or something. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's pretty good.
And your tools of the trade, Fender jazz bass. What attracted you to that?
Most of the time. Well, as I say, there weren't that many basses available when I started. No American bases at all because of the trade embargo. You know,
Right.
it's almost historical, isn't it? What was happening with the EU right now.
Right.
You couldn't buy American instruments because the taxes were so high, import
Wow.
duties were so high. So I started off with the German bass, half of the bass.
Right.
What I really wanted, and it was to do like a lot of young musicians. You see some of your favorite artists, and these are American guys, and they've got Fender basses.
Jet Harris.
Yeah, Jet Harris, of course. I think Jet was one that probably had the first P bass in the UK.
Right.
But I remember bands like the Treniers and D4 Bailey that played bass with, D4 Bailey Jr. actually played bass with Little Richard.
Okay.
All those guys, they had Fenders, Fender basses, and I wanted one of those. So eventually I got a P bass, and I had that in 1960. And we went to Hamburg, and the jazz bass had just come out.
Right.
62, and there's a guy that had one, and I played it, and I like the looks of it. I like the thinness of the neck.
Yeah.
I like the versatility of it, and I like the chrome plates. I must admit, I like the chrome as well. And shortly after returning from Germany, we did a show in Norfolk in the UK, and there was a guy in a band there had a jazz bass, and I said, I was talking to him, and he said, "Oh, I'm not really a bass player. I just got it from a guy. I bought it from a school teacher that's given up playing. I'm just playing bass in this band for the gig." So I traded in my jazz bass, my P bass, for his jazz bass,
Okay.
and I think £15 at the time. And he went on to be quite well known as Ian Hunter, you know, in
Oh, Martha Hopel. Sure. Yeah, I've interviewed him. Sure.
He actually lives near me in Connecticut.
Okay.
Oh, does he? Well, Ian's still got my P bass.
Oh, I'll have to ask him about that.
Yeah, he's still got it. And where are we? Should I find it?
There you go, David. That's a scoop, a news scoop there.
I love it. I love it.
Pull this out in the cupboard. Lucky it's not always here, but it's a shortage of space and security. I store it, but that's it.
There it is.
Oh,
Wow.
I love it. I love it. With the ashtray included.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You got to have the hardware.
I put it back on.
Of course.
Oh, the best.
Well, what I love is
Of course,
oh, okay, there you go. Wow. And he wears them out in the same spot.
sorry.
Well, now the bass center has made the Leo Lyons bass.
That second one is the one.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So now, and how do you, and they wore it out in all the right spots.
Yes, and I've worn it out some more. Yeah, but I've had a love affair with. I mean, you bass players. I've got maybe 20, 25 basses, I guess. Tried them all, but I always go back to the jazz format configuration.
Mm-hmm.
Warwick basses I use. Mostly the touring, I use a 5-string Warwick just to get a different sound, but still have a love affair with the 4-string.
Yeah, right. And the J bass, of course. When you think of all the different players that played a J bass, from
Yeah.
you know the reggae masters, Robbie Shakespeare, Aston Barrett, and then
Yeah.
of course there's Jocko, there's Larry Graham, it's John Paul Jones. It's amazing when you look at that one instrument, how many different players played it, yet they all played differently on it.
Yes, yeah, it's very versatile. You can,
Yeah.
you know, I'm thinking of doing something like that on YouTube, because people ask me, what bass should I get? I'm into this, into that. And quite honestly, there's so many choices of reasonable price guitars and basses now. And unlike when I started, where you paid a lot of money for a decent instrument, all the rest of it was rubbish. If you could learn to play on the first instrument that I got, first guitar I got, then you would be well on your way, because you had to persevere with something that it was, you know, the strings were like almost an inch from the fingerboard.
That's right.
You know.
Well, that's how you build your chops.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Marcus Miller said something very profound. He said, you know, if you look at all the great bass players, all the icons, let's say, whether it is a Chris Squire or a Jocko or a Paul McCartney, that they did all their great work on one instrument. It's not like today where you get specialty instruments, and that you overcome the instrument's weaknesses. Like, for example, McCartney said that he never played in the upper register of the Hofner because it would go out of tune.
Yes, yes, that's right. And I was always very wary about playing in the lower register.
Okay.
Years ago, because you couldn't get a sound out of it because of the amplification of the time. You know, it would be too much. And I started playing bass on a guitar, and once I got a bass guitar, the strings seemed so slack and loose that I developed my style. You know, around, if I was playing an E, around the 7th fret.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I play differently because you can get a sound. You've got amplifiers that will cover the whole octaves and compressors and one thing and another, so I can play wherever I want and on a 5-string. But you know, it is the bass dictates how you're going to play, and then what you get out of it is your style, I think. And I mean, there's something to be said in finding the instrument that you get on with and then stick with it.
Right.
Because you'll only get better as you learn the nuances of the instrument, how to get the tone out of it. I mean, they're all planks of wood with wire nailed on them, aren't they, in the end, you know?
That's all they are, yeah.
Yeah, you may want to change out pickups and mess around with it, as a lot of people do, but something to be said. When it fits like a glove, then don't change. It's sometimes fun, though, isn't it, you know, to pick something up and maybe give you another step up the ladder by encouraging you to play more.
What was that, David?
Did you ever play a fretless?
Yes, I did have a fretless bass. I played a fretless bass. I think I had maybe the first fretless bass to come into the UK. It was made by the Acoustic, the amplifier firm.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it was very popular or became very popular, but yeah, and I used it, and I think I probably used it on a few records as well, and I can't for the life of me remember which. People ask me, is that a fretless you're using? And I'm never quite sure. Unless it's horrendously out of tune, then I wouldn't know.
Did your fretless have lines, or was it just a piece of wood?
It was just, let me just think. I think that one maybe had lines.
Okay.
Yeah, I've still got it.
All right.
I haven't got it here, but I think it just had a few lines across it. I'm trying to think, because I've played quite a few. My basses don't. My upright basses, and there's one in the corner, they of course don't have lines. You just have to get used to the finger positions and the ear and the open strings, of course.
Right. Now in 1975, after your career with 10 years after your initial career, you go to Nashville to become a producer. What inspired that? That's quite a move.
Yeah, I went to Nashville much later than that.
Was it later? Okay.
Yeah, I was a producer in 75, but in the UK.
Oh, here, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I went to Nashville, I think, in the 80s.
Okay.
80 or 90, time flies, doesn't it? Maybe it was the 90s, I went late 80s. I started producing. I became a little frustrated because I think that 10 years after I was in a bit of a rut.
Okay.
And Alvin was insistent on being the songwriter, the main songwriter, although he was quite happy to take my riffs, bass riffs and things, but he really wanted to be the songwriter. And I felt we could move a little further forward and do things, but it was difficult to, how can I put it without sounding terrible? I felt I was putting a lot in and not getting a lot through. And so that an 100% input and getting 20% of that input into the band. So I started producing, yeah. Always recording and what have you. So I started producing other bands and one thing.
You did UFO and Frankie Miller and things. Now, when you think about producers, there are producers like Phil Spector who pretty much make the record. And then you have guys, let's say nowadays, like Rick Rubin or Don Was, that leave the artist alone and sort of let them have their own identity. Then you have George Martin, who kind of molded the Beatles. He took their raw energy and made it into something. What was your approach as a producer?
Well, I think in actual fact, George help the Beatles achieve what they were trying to achieve, because they
Right.
didn't know how to do it, you know, with his string arrangements and things like
Right.
that, suggestions and one thing and another. He wasn't a guy that said, this is the song you're doing, this is how you're going to do it, play this. He encouraged them and helped them in the studio genre. And I think that was kind of my approach too, was to get to, if I saw something in a band, I would try and translate it into a record to come out in the studio. Funnily enough, I was managed for a period of time by the same guy that managed George Martin, so I knew George, and I knew what you know, what his approach was. And,
You have quite a record as a producer. I mean, you went from Motorhead to one of our favorites, David, Hatfield in the North.
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes only just short projects with them. I mean, producing was always a second choice career. I mean, when I reached the age of 27, I thought I'm too old to go on the road. So I started getting involved with the studio. I've had a couple of studios of my own, and I also managed a big commercial studio for Crystal Records in the UK. So I've always been interested in the recording side, but it's always, my first love's always been standing on a stage and playing music. So there'd be a period I'd do some production, and then I'd not do any for a while. And often now people ask me to produce. I've got a few things that people want me to produce, but sometimes I can't raise the enthusiasm to do it. And it sounds terrible, but I almost talk myself into not doing something rather than saying, yes, I'll do it. You know, or, you know, I look for problems before I agree to do something. And but the only things I've really worked on are the, you know, the last few 10 years after records, and the HSS 170 split records, which I've produced. But I think that was because I'd had the experience, and as a band member, it's quite a lot different than being away from the band. It's a harder job, really, for me to do that.
Let's go to, what was your experience like in Nashville? Because now you're among a lot of the people who created the music you love. I mean, Nashville, such a great studio scene there, such a great music scene. What prompted that move?
Well, nothing was happening for me in the UK. I was writing country songs. So I went to Nashville with a bag of cassettes with songs that I'd written or co-written, hawked away up and down Music Row, got myself a publishing deal as a staff songwriter. And part of the deal was I had to move to Nashville. So I moved to Nashville then. And a lot of people liked the demos I'd been doing of the songs. So people asked me to do their demos, and I started working for publishing companies, not very often as a musician, but as an engineer. I'd engineer sessions. And a lot of the A team and B team session players were my age and often 10 years after fans. So it was quite interesting to do that. I learned an awful lot, because some of the best players, best writers and best players in the world are there or pass through. Alvin said to me at the time, "Why do you want to go to Nashville? All the best players are there." And I said, "That's why." You know, he was very wary of going there. But yeah, I learned an awful lot.
Yeah. Well, who were some of the players and some of the sessions that stand out to you there?
I honestly don't. I can't really say. I mean, I just enjoyed the whole thing. I was in awe of it. I learned a lot. Worked really hard, and
certainly a different lifestyle from London than to Nashville, to acclimate to the American lifestyle.
Yeah, it's intense. It's 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
For instance, I went there as a songwriter, but whilst I was being a songwriter, you could say my part-time job was working as an engineer too, because it supplemented my income. As a songwriter, you get paid a draw, and then you get paid on success, and that success sometimes takes a few years. But we'd go away for a weekend, maybe what they call it, whitewater rafting in the Carolinas, with maybe a load of business people, a load of writers, and this, that, and the other. Had it been a group of rock and rollers, we'd have gone whitewater rafting, we'd had a bonfire, we'd have had beers and we'd have drunk, and that would have been fun. When you go with a bunch of people from Nashville, you do all those things, but you take your cassettes and you play each other's songs and you set up writing appointments. Business never stops.
Yeah,
it's unbelievably intense. I found that a little bit difficult.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's a different culture, and Americans, in some ways, are more. What's the word without? They're more assertive than a lot of English people are.
To be polite, yes.
If you were in a room with 10 songwriters, and one of them was English, and someone said, "Has anybody got a song for such and such an artist?" 9 people would be down that guy's throat, and the other guy would be at their back going. The English guy would be going, "Well, maybe." There'd be 9 guys saying, "I have, definitely, bang, 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 bang." And that's how it worked. You put your cassette on the desk, somebody puts one on top, someone puts one on top. So it was intense.
Yeah, very competitive.
One of my sons works in the record business now, the music business in Nashville, and it's an intense 24-hour-a-day business there, unlike in the UK where, it's a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah. And then of course you reform 10 years after. Talk about that experience and the fact that it seems like the music you made is an evergreen genre. You can always go back to it. It never goes out of style. People are always interested and affected by it.
Yes, there are. It's often is not in the forefront of the pop media, but I don't think it ever has. It's never been played on, or not been played much on popular radio or in popular magazines or the latest teen thing or clothes fashions going after it. There's not been, not since say the 60s with the psychedelic thing that a little bit with the advent of FM radio. Without FM radio, it wouldn't have happened. But it's always there. You get people of my age, your age, and younger that are interested. Musicians that are interested in younger brothers, sons, daughters that are interested in it, and then a whole new genre of kids that weren't born at the time of Woodstock that look at it and think, wow, it must have been fantastic in those days, and they start listening to perhaps Hendrix or some of the more popular things, and then get into, the more obscure bands. So, yeah, there's a market for it. It may not be in the large venue in the city, but it being one of the other venues in the city, and then periodically, like with people like Bonamassa or whatever, it may be moved for a time into a larger venue and then back down. But it's always there. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned Joe Bonamassa, because now we spoke with his bass player Carmen Rojas, and now here the American Joe Bonamassa is bringing British blues back to the UK, and he's playing in his set. He's playing Cream. He's playing 10 years after. He's playing Jethro Tull.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, remarkable. So, I mean, obviously, given the plague, COVID, we don't know what's going to happen. What are some of your future musical goals? What does Leo Lyons have to do yet?
Well, I think I've done it. If you've played the major venues in the world, which is all over the world, then it may seem strange to want to go back and do it again. But in some ways I do. But I have long-term goals and short-term goals, and realistic goals is I like to just go out and tour and play. And that's what we're doing. We couldn't work last year. Everything was cancelled last year. Everything this year is cancelled until October. And I'm just hoping that in October, things will be okay for us to go out and tour again.
Yeah.
I was talking with my agent today. Some of the shows that we're doing in October, the venues have gone bust, and so it's difficult to know what's happening. And I like to think optimistically, but occasionally I don't know. I've got I'm fine. I've done very well out of the business, and I've diversified because I've produced records and I've written songs and one thing and another. So there's a residual income comes in for me, and my needs aren't much. When you get to a certain age, it's not much you need, I don't want to buy a yacht. I
Yeah.
don't need more than one or two cars, and I've done all that. Not a yacht, but I've done the the mansions and the cars and all the rock and roll bullshit that everybody has to do. So I'm okay. I just miss standing on a stage, whether it's
Right.
200 people or tens of thousands of people. It doesn't matter. It's just great to go out and do that and to get what you call in the zone. We can practice all we like and play at home, but when you get on stage, sometimes you open up and you tune in and the energy of the audience and get up to a higher level and get in that zone or whatever and pull something down, comes through your body and something comes out that you thought, bloody hell, that was good. How did I do that? And you didn't, it came through you, and that's the magic when that happens. And particularly if you're with a band, the band I work with, I get on really well with the guys.
Yeah.
And if we all lock into that zone at the same time, we have an unbelievable night,
Yeah.
And that's
It's almost as if
it's not money.
the worst thing that ever happened
Sorry?
getting on stage. It almost as if the worst thing that happened is the first time you get on stage, because when you don't, it becomes kind of crazy.
Yeah. So I miss that. That's what I miss, and I'm looking forward to to it happening in October.
All right.
You see, with 170 Split, we are a, what's the word? We write the songs, we arrange the songs, we play the songs, but as the songs develop, and you'll understand this, it develops. There's a lot of interchange and interplay and nuances and this, that, and the other. And I, as a record producer, I don't think that we can achieve that by one guy laying down the kit, then me putting the bass on, then the guitar, then the vocal, then the other. And you can't do it live because of the delay, between.
Right.
So we've not been able to. Well, I can't leave Wales right now because we're locked in. I can't travel more than 5 miles and so on and so forth. So we can't get together to do that. We did some stuff on YouTube at first, but we'd already got that done. It was just a question of putting the video to it. People say, why don't you make a record? And I could make a pop record because I could do it to clicks and so on and so forth, but not. I don't think it would be right with the type of music I'm playing at the moment to be able to do that. Having said that, there are a few projects coming up for other people that I'll just put the bass on, but that's a different thing altogether. So I'm twiddling my thumbs basically, I've started picking up the bass again. I took some time out, but I'm picking it up again and just warming up, hardening up the blisters.
Yeah.
And get ready.
All right. Well, great talking with you. I hope to get to the bass center and check out the Leo Lyons bass.
Yeah.
I'm battering my Fender Jazz as much as I can, but I still got a way to go. I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that happened more so in the early days because of the plate was being on, so the thumb turned that way.
Right.
And sort of like that. Now you play it more. It's flatter, whereas before I was. So the thumb's what's gouged out that thing.
Right.
But I'm always impressed about how these, because they make them now and you have to pay extra for them to wear out the bass.
I know. I was so careful with mine. Wrapped it up in a silk cloth every night and really looked after it. And there it is. Now it's got the mojo, they say. People copy them, don't they?
Where you got to pay for the mojo, but they did get the sweat spots in all the right places. I was very.
Yeah. They've done a good job. It's a good bass too.
It is. Yeah.
It's the bass centre. It's the bass centre in London. It's nothing to do with the bass centres across the States.
Yeah.
Well, they're very good. I'm pleased. Well, I had a hand with making modifications. They did a computer graphic thing of my bass, took it apart, worked out all the measurements and so on and so forth, built it, and then I had a hand in saying this, that, and the other, and I changed out some of the capacitors
Okay.
and pickups, messed around with pickups and one thing and another till it was how I personally wanted it. But
it's not a real bass until you drill a hole into it, anyways.
no.
But you're in good company. Norman Watroy, Guy Pratt. There's quite a few. Bruce Thomas. So
Yes, yeah. But the guy that owns the bass centre was a bass player, of course.
Of course, yeah.
He was a fan as well, and Barry Morehouse, his name.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
So that's when Barry approached me and said, we'd like to do a Leo Lyons bass. Would you be interested? So I said, yeah, sure. As long as I can approve it, because if I'm going to endorse it, I'm going to play it. I'm not just going to endorse something and then go back to playing something else, you know, which a lot of people do. And I like it, and it sounds good. And being it against my original jazz, I would say objectively that on the original jazz, the pickup wiring's got a little mellower, so it sounds just a little mellower.
Okay.
So that when you want to put it on a record, you probably put a little bit of more low middle in, whereas the other bass, it goes flat. So it's nitpicking, decide which one sounds the best. To most people, they'll both sound the same.
All right. Well, that's great stuff. All right, David, anything else?
No, it's just wonderful seeing you.
Yeah, it's great
Thank
to
you.
see
Thanks for inviting me. Good to have a chat.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. We'll